you can really see how the sort of like socialism or barbarism dynamic is playing out right now, right? Like liberalism seems completely unresponsive to the many crises we're facing at the moment, from stripping away, our basic rights to like, our basic reproductive rights in the US, voting rights, to not taking anything about climate change seriously whatsoever, to school shootings, to this economic downturn we've just spent the last hour talking about. All Democrats are capable of is asking for donations and like telling us to vote harder. And then Republicans, as you laid out quite clearly, and just the right wing across the West and in general, is like, oh, we just need more privatization, more tax cuts. People are really desperate for something to change. And as we know, it's moments like this when fascism can prosper, but also it's moments like this when socialism can prosper. So as a longtime political organizer yourself, as well as a journalist, how do you see things playing out? And I'm not, I know no one can predict anything really, but how do you see things playing out? And more importantly, you know, what do you think people should be doing and focusing on in a moment like this? Because like you said, the far right across Europe, across the US, across the world really is taking advantage of this moment. So I hope the left takes advantage of it as well. So what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, well, I think the future, I think we can predict that what you said is true, that there's going to be an increase in chaos. And I think that in totally unpredictable consequences for things that we don't even know. I mean, you look at the climate crisis, you obviously look what's happening with wars expanding all around the globe as the sort of rapaciousness of imperialism continues to grow as their hegemony starts to slip. It's sort of like backing an animal into a corner. It's actually becoming more dangerous now as its model is becoming more and more clearly and obviously obsolete. All of these things put together, I think, portend that there's going to be greater chaos and greater turmoil in the world. So I think people have to focus on what the alternative is and what the sort of base level values have to be in order to turn things around. Because, it really can't just be a policy discussion, because as we've seen and as we've talked about this entire interview, the sort of policy tools of capital are not, in fact, in any way, shape, or form going to solve any of the problems. They cannot meet the scale of the challenges. I mean, you look at the climate as the biggest example of that, but it's even, beyond that, just the fact that the US can't even pass enough infrastructure dollars to fix all the bridges that could collapse at any time in and of itself gives you a sense of the decrepitness of this system. And so we have to really think, what are the base level things that we need to prosper as humanity, and what kind of system can go against that? And and can actually establish that and can cut against the grain, I should say, of what exists right now, right? And I think that basically comes down to the values of capitalism versus the values of socialism, in my view, and really clarifying that for people. Because, in capitalism, there's one value, and it's the almighty dollar, as they say. It's profit. Everything that is produced to make money. And only incidentally does it do it. You don't make clothes because people want to wear clothes. You don't make food because people need to eat. You don't make housing because people need a roof over their head. You don't have health care because people need to be healthy. You have all those things because they can generate money. And you got other things that who knows why we need them, but we're still buying them. And so that's the nature of capitalism, is everything is produced only for $1. And to the extent it doesn't make money, it's not going to be produced. That's why you have a crisis of affordable housing, because at the end of the day, it's not that profitable to make housing for poor people. So there's never going to be enough of it, because there's not really any sort of incentive in the quote unquote economy to make it happen. But socialism is a very different sort of proposition, which is saying that people do have a basic right to a livable planet, to education, to a roof over their head, to healthcare, to eating. Like, basically, socialism is saying that the key goal of society is to make sure that every single person lives the best, longest life they can. And that everything should be subordinated to making sure that every single person lives the best, longest life they can. And so if that's a fundamental value that people agree with, and I think most people could get down with that, like, yes, the number one goal of all structures created to govern this society and everything in it is to make sure that I live long and that I live well, and that everyone who is related to me, who I know, who lives around me, also lives long and lives well, then you basically are for socialism. And what is the difference between what can be and what is? It's only the power of capitalists, a tiny group of people, over the government, the so-called state that they use to repress you. Why do people follow the law at the end of the day? Because they know they can go to jail or be killed by the cops. And so the repressive value of the government is the key factor. The government, we know, is controlled by big money and controlled by big business. And because they have this repressive instrument in their hand that they can use and manipulate to prevent the things that we know could solve the problems we need from that are happening, that could solve the problems that are happening, then that's the only difference. So if we change that we can have nice things, basically, for lack of a better term. And so I think that's the moment we have to really take advantage of here now, is people are desperate. People are looking for change. They are looking for solutions. And that's why fascist movements are popular, because they offer you very easy solutions. They offer you Occam's razor kind of solutions to the problem that you're having. There's 20, 30, I mean, you look at the example of America, and you look at what's happening with the so-called MAGA movement and these other far-right fascists. They're saying to people, well, listen, when were things good for your grandparents, maybe 1950s, things like that? Things were good then, right? People had houses, they had this, they had that, you had jobs, you had this, you had that. The country's been hollowed out. They're bringing in all these new people. And that's what they say. Well, back then, there weren't any immigrants here. Back then, they didn't have all, people running around with rainbow flags. Back then, women knew their place. They stayed in the home. Back then, Black people, you knew what was going on with Black people. They weren't asking for too much. And so then you look at that and say, so what's the difference now? You got Black people demanding all this. You got gay people demanding rights. You have women trying to get out here and work in the workforce. You have people coming from Central America. So what's Occam's razor? What's the biggest difference, right? So that must be the problem. It is a highly simplistic solution, but it makes sense because it's based on the relative sense of what was happening at a very different time in the United States, and where, by the way, things weren't that good for most people. Mm-hmm. And the illusion of the so-called middle income economy, I don't want to get into that, but, it wasn't what they said it was. But even to the extent it was, obviously it was for other reasons. But you have that kind of Occam's razor. And fascism offers you those very easy scapegoats that are based on, sort of basic things that seem to be true, that feel somewhat true by this sort of surface level thing. And it says, we're going to resolve that right now. We're going to find a way. We're going to get these immigrants out of here, or we want to go back in time. We're going to go after those Jews. It's the same thing, same logic. And we're going to find these people who are causing these problems, and we're going to get rid of them for you. And so since people need immediate relief and are desperate for immediate relief, they grasp onto these small solutions. So we have to do a lot of the explaining to show people immigrants are not the problem in the United States. Immigrants to the United States didn't cause any problem you have right now, and they aren't causing any other ones. Because quite frankly, you could have double the number of immigrants, and there's still not enough. Listen, if you go, you can look at this. People should look it up in the Bureau of Labor Statistics. You can look up how many job openings there are in every job category. There are tons of job openings. So there is no situation where immigrants coming to the United States have restricted the number of jobs that are actually out there and available. Every single area of the economy has a need for jobs, including manufacturing, by the way, including the building trades, by the way, and all these other areas that are allegedly being restricted and taken away by immigrants. It's not the fault of China that factories went to Asia. It was the fault of the monopoly capitalists in the United States who said, well, American workers, they want too much. They want to have a decent life. And we don't want our workers to have a decent life because that costs us too much money. And then we won't have the life we want. I mean, can you imagine how bad it would be if my Olympic-sized pool didn't have an indoor-outdoor portion that was partially heated? So in the winter, I could go swimming and also have my helipad so I can move back and forth and don't have to worry about traffic. How terrible would that be for me? So I got to get rid of these workers who want to just have like one car and a house with 3 bedrooms in it and a yard. So ultimately, it's not the fault of China. And so we have to go deeper and show people that the scapegoats are just that. They're scapegoats. They're not real. It's the capitalist class of people that's manipulating everyone else to make sure that they take home the most money at the end of the day, and they take home more and more every single year. And that once we eliminate that need for everything to be produced for profit and say, why don't we do this instead? And look at what exists, what's necessary for people to live and just survive. And then what do people want, right? Like, what are the things that with the available productive capacity we can definitely do, so that production is based on what do we have, making sure everyone gets exactly what they need, and making sure we do the maximum amount to get people what they want, and then also structure society to make sure we can expand the wants over and above the needs so people's lives continue to get better. But that requires planned production, not the anarchy of capitalism, which is just everything is concerned by profit and money moves around based on where the most profit is being made. It means saying, what do we have? What do we need? What do we want? How do we get from point A to point B in developing and making sure everyone has what they need, and we can continue to give people what they want and grow the things that they want so people's lives can continue to improve. It's pretty basic and it's pretty straightforward, but if we don't have those kind of explanations for people to help them see, be beneath them beyond the propaganda, it's not going to happen, and things can get much, much worse, as bad as they are now. And I think we're headed in a very negative direction in the world. Climate change, nuclear war, growth of poverty, growth of hunger, all these different things that are happening. These are the trends. And so the only question is will those trends be arrested by a movement of people that are going to say, no, we have to turn things around and live based on what people need and people's well-being, as opposed to the private profit making of the, Davos elite.
Whew, I couldn't have said it better. That got me fired up. And I think it's also a good point to tell everyone who is still watching and listening. That's why you should support Breakthrough News at patreon.com/breakthrough news, so that we can help inform people about what the actual structural problems are here, rather than the scapegoating that you're talking about. But on that note, Eugene, I want to thank you for joining me once again on Dispatches to break all this down for us. Eugene Puryear, journalist at Breakthrough News, host of the daily podcast, The Punch Out, which is such a necessary thing to listen to. It's like 15 minutes of the news you need to hear every day from the right perspective, or the left perspective. I should be careful how I say that. Anyways, Eugene, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Rania.